Criminologies in advance.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I usually have Miss Lisa watching the canines, but she
Obviously
is
not today.
no, she is with Miss Remy. Before we get going, today I'm joined by my good friend, Dr. T.C. Fuller. Dr. T.C. Fuller is no stranger to those on this morning's show. He's the author of many books. We'll let him discuss each one briefly as we're waiting for some folks to jump on. Dr. Fuller, take it away, sir.
Well, we have my initial offering, Painting Over Rust. It's a couple years old now. That's a memoir of my time in the Bureau. The Bureau being the FBI for new visitors to the show. Then I did a book on improving the way we train law enforcement officers specifically to administer deadly force, but it has applicability in the civilian world as well and the military world. And then I did a third book. I guess I put this one out last year, which was Empathy for the Devil, which is about my time as an interrogator in Guantanamo Bay with the FBI. And that is what we have to date. I'm working on the next book. I think I'm going to do a fictional offering next time. And we'll see how that goes.
What is the fiction about?
That way I don't want to give away the store, but it's about, it's a variation on, you remember the DC snipers?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So it's a fictionalized account of an actual, they called them snipers at the time. We'll get a little deep into this, which I found a little bit overstated. I mean, it was two knuckleheads with a 223 shooting out of the trunk of a car. Their shots weren't that long. They weren't trained at all. And look at the havoc it caused. Mm-hmm. So I decided to think, well, what would happen if actual sniper teams got loose in the United States? People that knew what they were doing and actually started, conducting sniper operations in the United States, not just observation, but actually, pulling triggers. What would that do? And so I've kind of created that. And it serves both as entertainment and as a case study, I think.
Did you ever read any of, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank, Dalton Fury's fiction? You familiar with who he was?
No, I'm not. What a name, though, huh? What a cool name.
Yeah, of course, it's a nom de guerre, or actually in this case, probably nom de plume. His actual name was Major Thomas Greer. He was a Delta Force guy who, sadly, he passed away right in the middle of his writing career after he retired. 50-something-year-old healthy man. I think it was pancreatic cancer. Anyway, he wrote the book Kill Bin Laden. I don't know if you remember that book. Anyway, he was in charge of the first Delta team that went into Tora Bora to try to get Bin Laden right after 9/11. And I really loved his fiction. I mean, he didn't have the following of Brad Thor and some of the other Tom Clancy, but this is the guy that really, walked the walk. And some of his stuff he writes one that's very similar to that, but it's about, and was written, of course, 10, 20 years ago. No, I'm sorry, 10, 15 years ago at the most. A group of Islamic jihadists, they crossed the southern border under a future administration that allows that kind of thing to happen. Shocker. And he talks about the fact that there are these man pads, Stinger missiles to be specific. There's still, man, I don't know what the last, if you believe the numbers, it's like 80 to 100 Stinger missiles that are still unaccounted for from going back to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The CIA platform tried to buy them all back, had to get some of them. So this was what would happen if a team of these people got into the heartland of America with Stingers and just kind of broke apart into different cells. I love his books.
Well, it's funny you say that because one of the missions we were pulling when I was in Afghanistan was buying back Stingers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were chasing around and offering bounties on the Stingers. The good news is, which was scary enough then. That was, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. But, if to put your mind at a little bit at ease, there are parts of that missile system that need consistent
maintenance,
high-end maintenance.
Yeah.
And without it, even then, most of the ones we were getting back in were non-functional.
But there's a case to be made for, look what Iran has done with its F-14 Tomcats.
Yeah.
They've been under sanction forever, and yet they keep them flying somehow.
Well, not Tomcats. They have Phantoms, don't they? Is this
I'm pretty
are they
sure it's
flying
Tomcats.
Are they Tomcats? Really?
Yes,
Wow,
yes.
okay.
There
I know
might
they've
be some
got tanks.
Phantoms still there, but they definitely have
Yeah.
Tomcats. Oh
Oh
yeah.
wow, okay. Yeah, and you like to think that the capabilities of a nation state are, in terms of maintenance, are a little bit higher than some guy in a cave somewhere, but you just never know.
But imagine the nation state that, well, not even a nation state, but something like the Houthis. I only need 6 of them.
Yeah.
I don't need
You,
all of them.
you collect up 20 and only one works. That's all it takes.
Exactly.
You splash one 747 with a stinger, and you're going to watch entire industries disappear.
Oh my God, I can't imagine. But that's a legit threat. And did you? Well, I don't want to ask you that point blank on the show if you collected any of them.
I don't want to lie to you on air, Rich.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good enough when we're off air. Will Rhodes is on. Scott is on. Good morning, gentlemen, from mid-Michigan. Coin number 2489. If you want to find out about this coin number business and if becoming a member of our self-defense community is the right decision for you and your family, please check out the links in today's show notes. You can also find links to Dr. Fuller's website where you can pick up some of his books if you'd like to do that. Mr. Alan Kelly is on. Good morning, sir. Derek is on. Will Parker. Ted. My good friend Michael Gentili says, I remember the chaos of a deranged sniper in D.C. around 2002. Yeah, that was it. John Lee. Was it John Lee
Malvo?
Yeah. I think he was the trigger man. And Mohammed, whatever the hell his name was, the former Army guy, was driving the Caprice, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
But call them snipers, call them murderers, call them whatever you want. And you're right. I don't think any of the shots were probably more than 100-ish yards. And they were just center mass hits. But I mean, it showed the deadliness of a 5.56 round. I mean,
yeah, we have all these arguments about the poodle shooter, the 5.56 round, but I carried one in 2 wars. I'm here to tell you, they will work. They function as designed. There's no part of your anatomy that's designed to have a high velocity rifle round pass through it.
No, sir. No. John Shriver is on. Ted says a guy I knew in college shot dead getting gas. That's, that was the scary thing. And then when they started, we're going to start hunting your children. And then it was like, I think we can all remember at that time, this is right after 9/11. And who was it Montgomery County Sheriff that was on there, in tears almost every day. I mean, sweeping up another murder. And I mean, that's good. I can't wait to read your book, Dr. Phillips. I'm looking forward to that.
It's more motivation to actually put butt in chair.
Yes, sir. Dr. Gordon Botson is on. Mark Hamilton is on. Let's get into the show. Got just a few slides today, but I think it's going to be an interesting one. Dr. Fuller, Trump has come out and said, the Ukraine is in a bad way. They're encircled. Of course, it sounds like Ukrainian propaganda. There appears to be whatever there was relative to an encirclement. It appears that thousands of Ukrainians actually made it out of that region alive. Much ado about nothing, or does this kind of make the peace process, spin up in velocity?
I short answer is I don't have enough detail and granularity to make a educated comment on that. We can talk in generalities. I mean,
sure.
the Russians have struggled through this whole war. Let's be honest. They just they really haven't performed to the level any of us expected them to. And to see them actually have some more success on the battlefield, I think it's starting to speak to their experience levels and Ukrainian exhaustion. One thing the Russians have over the Ukrainians is bodies. They have a ton more bodies, and they're fighting. We see some of the stuff that the Russians are doing. It's kind of a traditional Russian approach. You don't have the materiel, you have the men. So just throw men at the problem. And that's what they do. They just drag them out of prisons or wherever they get them, and they just throw enough people at it. And there's an old military saying, this is quantity has a quality all its own. And, there's a limit to it. And we can fight this proxy war. And let's be honest, that's exactly what this is. For a long time, but where's the end state? Where do we end up at the end of this? The Ukrainians lose a generation like the French and the Germans did in World War I 100 years ago. Is that really success for anybody? I just, at this point, 3 years in, I think everybody would like to see the war end, even those of us that aren't directly involved in it. It's just what's going to be a satisfactory ending for everybody. I don't think Putin can, retreat to neutral corners and reinstitute the borders as they were before the invasion and call it a win. I think he, politically, he needs to have some territory gained for the expenditure of lives and treasure. I don't think the Ukrainians are strong enough to push the Russians all the way out. And so they're probably going to have to accept the loss of some territory. And, what's the definition of a deal, right? Is when both sides walk away unsatisfied.
That's right.
So I think the only way you're going to see this end is if both sides are willing to compromise and both sides are willing to be dissatisfied with the outcome. Because what's the alternative? A forever war? The Russians just in living memory had a forever war in Afghanistan, and they eventually ended up going home with their tail between their legs.
Right.
And
not quite as bad as we did.
No, they didn't leave much gear, although they did leave plenty of gear. I mean, God knows enough of it was fired at me when I was there. And
watch the videos of them pulling out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, well, the shared border helps.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they didn't just toss their sucker in the dirt and fly away. With Afghanis clinging to their aircraft. But there are people around in Afghanistan, some of their general staff that fought in Russia that fought in Afghanistan. So they know what that looks like. And they had Chechnya. The same defense minister, I think, was in charge in Chechnya, and that was the better part of 2 decades ago. Excuse me just a second.
Of course. So we're talking about the war in Ukraine. A lot of talk about is their encirclement of the troops, I think, that pushed into Kursk region. And who knows? There's so much propaganda swirling around on both sides. It's hard to say what is and is not true. But I think everything you said in a general sense is right on. And I think the other thing I would say is the technology of this war, specifically the drone technology, is something that we'll contend with for millennia to come.
Yeah, I think that's the new reality that we're all going to end up dealing with. I think Putin launching this offensive right now also is designed to put additional pressure on Zelensky to come to the bargaining table and to sit down and have those serious conversations, because it demonstrates that the Russians are still capable of offensive action, still capable of taking territory, still capable of killing more Ukrainians. And that's just adding to the pressure that Zelensky's got to be under at this point.
Yeah, let's move on to the Houthis. We've talked, Dr. Fuller, you and I have talked about the Houthis for a few years now. The Houthis control parts of western Yemen, including the capital and crucial ports there along the Red Sea. They've been under bombardment in one form or another for the past decade, at least, since 2015. So there's not a whole lot of new going on, except with over the weekend, Trump ordered airstrikes on Yemen. And according to the Houthis, they've had at least 31 people killed. Now, of course, my point of talking about the Houthis getting smacked isn't this just a kind of a love letter to Iran and their leaders, as far as like, hey, man, we need to restart these talks. I sent you a letter, a personal letter from me to you. You have yet to respond to it. I'm open to bilateral communication and talks, because you need to understand we will never allow you to have a nuclear program. Or is it really a matter of the Houthis? What say you?
Well, I mean, the short answer is it's a matter of the Houthis being a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously everyone knows that the Houthis are connected to Iran, that the Houthis could not continue to fight like this were it not for the overt support of Iran at this point. So you've got to get their attention. And short of actually blasting Iranians, the only way to really do that is to smack the Houthis around. And, they brought it on themselves. They really have. It's really a shame that other Arab nations aren't willing to go in there, get on the ground, and wipe these guys out. But such as
you think we're restraining Saudi Arabia from doing something like that? Or
I don't know. I mean, my opinion of the Saudi military has always been tepid. They've never really impressed me as, a force to be reckoned with. Now that may be misguided. I may be erroneous in that. That's certainly a possibility, but they've just never struck me as the guys that are going to go over there and say, no, enough of this. We are a regional power and we will not allow this to happen. The Iranians are the big kid on the block in that area. The Saudis have money. So why spend bodies when you can spend cash, right? You know, you can support the Americans. The Americans will come do it for you. I think I would like to see us get away from that and let some of these people handle their own business. You know, at the end of the day, yes, we have a lot of commerce that travels through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. There's a lot of international interest in that region, but there's not a lot of Americans getting killed. So I would like to see the Saudis lead the way. And plus, the Saudis share a border with Yemen. I mean, come on, guys. This is really your problem more than it is our problem. I'm not saying it's not our problem at all, but I'm saying that, you know, what you don't see there in your list is it's the U.S., the U.K., and Israel bombing the Houthis. Where is the Saudi military? Where's the Saudi Air Force?
I'd be just paying for all of it.
You know, maybe, but hey, put some planes in here, pull some sorties, you know, manage the optics. But you know, what do I know?
I know. You know, the people that I know that are still in the military, they're mostly deploying a lot to Djibouti, and you can see Djibouti right there. And so the unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, etc., the ISR that's coming out of Djibouti to monitor all this. I mean, it's why that base continues to grow.
And you know, it is a perfectly good way to map the Iranian infrastructure. You know, crack their codes, figure out where everybody is, where General Abu Brown is sitting and General Abu Fuller is sitting, and know where these guys are, so that if things do end up with a shooting war where the U.S. decides to really go after the Iranians,
we got the battle space pretty well mapped out.
It's going to be very well mapped out, and we're going to know who's who and who needs to get got and who doesn't. So
and
yeah,
that's called the intelligence preparation of the battle space.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. And you know, Trump, as we've talked about before, President Trump is a deal maker, and so he's making a deal here. He's trying to say, look, I've got a carrot and I've got a stick, and he, unlike many administrations in the past on both sides of the aisle, seems very, very willing to use that stick. You know, he knows that he's got the biggest stick, and it's just like playing poker and knowing that you have 5 times the amount of chips that the guy you're playing against. At some point, you can just overwhelm him with your betting. That's where we are militarily. The Iranians are a big deal in that part of the world. They're not a big deal anywhere else.
All right, good point.
And you know, the only thing that's really, I think, keeping us from just knocking them down is the fact that we don't want to. You know, we just don't want to put bodies on the ground. We don't want to fight another war in that part of the world. But the idea that we can't and that we couldn't defeat Iran is laughable.
Yeah, but in some regard, it's like, what does that war even look like?
Yeah.
I mean, same thing with the Houthis, and I didn't put it up here because their strength is, if you believe them, they've got 150,000 martyrs and all this kind of. Well, do you really? I mean, maybe they do that are fighting age males. I don't know. But
how many did they send here in the last several years?
Exactly, and I think that's my larger point. Okay, on a war with Iran, are certain groups going to be activated that the Biden administration allowed to come ashore here, or no, not really? I mean, will the call for Intifada really kind of turn into something or not? I don't know. My lovely bride, Miss Lisa, is on. We are now grandparents, and there's a picture of our beautiful granddaughter, Remy Gale. Come on.
Congratulations to everyone involved.
Let's talk about moving on from this, because I look forward to seeing how they respond to Trump's letter. If there's copies of the letter floating around, I've yet to see them, so I don't know what he may have said or not said, but he seems pretty pleased with the letter. Alien Enemies Act. This is another thing President Trump did over the weekend. You know, he issued a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act. I think one of the things that John Adams, if I'm not mistaken, signed into law, and I don't think he was ever really happy with having done that. But it gives the president authority to detain and deport nationals of an enemy nation during wartime or invasion. First time the act has been issued since World War II, and actually, I believe only the third time ever. Now, what's interesting about this is I no sooner than I cheered that this had happened in a group of non-citizens here in the United States that were allegedly members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. That's it. Sued to prevent their imminent deportation. So, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, who was a member of Skull and Bones, actually, when he was at Yale, probably just nothing, an Obama appointee and former FISA judge, ordered the Trump administration to direct 2 flights carrying the non-citizens come back to the United States 45 minutes before the first 2 of the flights landed in Honduras. Of course, they were in international waters, and Trump said, that's a shame. Can't call them back. They're in international waters. Both flights carrying the non-citizens, i.e. gang members, took off from Texas during a break in the emergency court hearings about the legality of the deportations and flights were in the air when the judge issued them to come back. What are your thoughts about this, man?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Pulling out the alien, the
Alien and Seditions Act.
Thank you.
Like that, yeah.
Pulling out that act is an interesting move. As you say, it's not often used. I wonder how we're defining enemy nations, because I'm pretty sure Honduras doesn't qualify as an enemy nation. Under a strict interpretation.
I think that's going to be the key here. It's going to probably have to go to the Supreme Court and decide, like, if we say this group, because here's the thing, Dr. Phil, and I'm glad you brought this up. If this organization has a rank structure and a hierarchy, and there's a financial arm and a militant arm and yada, 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 do they qualify for being defined as X for this act? And I think it would be precedent setting. I'm not aware of the Supreme Court ever coming down either way on this, other than you could look at the Korematsu decision, which is similar to this, where FDR with the Japanese Americans, in internment camps, and the Supreme Court in the Korematsu decision said, yes, a president can do this.
Yeah, and of course later generations said, yeah, that was a bad move.
Right.
It may have been legal, didn't make it right. And look, even if these guys have an incredibly well-structured organization with a chieftain, a chief grand poobah, whatever we're calling him, and a chain of command all the way down, and an internal infrastructure, I still balk at the idea that they qualify as a nation state. So, if they don't fit the bill for that law, then make another law. I mean, you have both houses and the presidency make another law that allows you to do that. But saying that you can do it under the Alien Enemies Act, it's going to get hashed out in court. Now, to a point you've made more than once, and Trump seems keenly aware, look, they're already gone. These guys are out of here by the time, and of course the court has no way to force the executive branch to obey its rules. It can make all the decisions it wants, but it can't force the issue. It has no physical means to force the president to obey. And we've seen that acted out as far back as Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
And I balk here. I don't think that's the way we want to go. I just don't think it's a good idea to set that precedent that presidents are simply acting extrajudicially and doing whatever they want to do. Now, by the flip side is these guys needed to go. If you're here illegally, strike one. As far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't be here illegally. You should come here the legal way. And I understand completely why you would want to. And I understand that it's a long, drawn out process and it should be modified or altered by Congress. I agree with all that.
But I would submit that there's no legal process where a Venezuelan gang member should be here in the country.
And no doubt. But that's why they're here illegally. And strike two is you get here and then you start committing crimes.
Correct. So
you're here illegally, which is a crime. And then you start committing, they're not like they're, parking at parking meters and not paying them, right? They're mugging people. They're beating people. They're
raping, killing, extorting.
Yeah. Right. So these are bad dudes. They were bad dudes in Honduras, bad dudes in Venezuela, bad dudes in the other places where they were, and they fled them. Because really, what's the downside? You want to go to prison in Venezuela, you want to go to prison in the United States.
What's interesting about this, and I didn't make this distinction clear. What's interesting here is these are Venezuelan gang members that are being sent to El Salvador to serve their sentence. So what's interesting, and we're paying Venezuela, I think, $3 million to house these clowns. because Venezuela's not going to take them back. So El Salvador's like, yeah, we can use some American coin, and like I said, the art of the deal get closer into the pocket of United States by housing these clowns. So
And you know,
that is going to be a twist of the Alien and Seditions Act. Okay, you're not just deporting them; you're deporting them to another nation, right? I mean, that's wild.
Yeah. And you're paying people, and it's funny because you know El Salvador thinks, oh yeah, we'll take the money, and you know we're going to spend $100 a month on housing these guys. This is going to be a lot of profit. What they don't think long term is that they're going to become dependent on that cash very quickly.
Yeah,
and you know, all of a sudden we now have another lever to pull. Say, well, if you don't do X and Y, then that money gets lessened or stopped. So that's going to add an element later on down the line that should be interesting to watch. So you pull the Alien Sedition or the Alien Enemies Act out, and I have to be honest, I didn't read the entire act before the show, and it's a failing on my part. I see a trend where the president is doing a lot of stuff unilaterally. He's doing a lot of stuff by fiat, by executive order. And I remember shows we did a couple of years ago where we were all grousing about the president overusing executive orders.
Correct.
And he set, you know, the last administration set that precedent of using it a lot. This administration has said, you know, hold my beer, and has done it even more. And I understand why that's happening. Congress is gridlock. Congress can't do its job, won't do its job, refuses to do its job, however you want to put that. So they're not passing laws. They're not getting things done. I mean, when was the last time that a budget was passed? I don't even know. We've been working off of continuing resolutions for a decade, 2 decades. I don't even know how long it's been. That's their one job. You got one job, Carl, and you're just not doing it. So it gets to a point where, look, if something doesn't get done, we start to fail, and we start to fail no-fail missions. So I understand why presidents are starting to overuse executive orders. I just don't like it.
No, I don't like it either, even when it's my side doing it. Only thing, you know, the pendulum swung to the left and everyone complained. Now it's back over to the right. People in our social groups don't complain as much, but if it swung further to the right, and if anybody thinks that it's not going to swing further to the left when it comes back around, you're fooling yourself. You're not reading history, because that's exactly what's going to happen. And like we've talked about before on the show, he's loading an executive gun that he's going to hand to the next president. Yeah.
And there's nothing that says that next president's going to be your guy.
No, it probably won't be our guy.
Right. So, you know,
but here's what I like about it. It seemed, and I could be wrong, if they're used this way, if you want to get something done now, okay, executive order, and then you try to cement that with law and get it before the Supreme Court and or becomes case law, et cetera, you know, so that these things are a little bit more cemented into. But if you just do an executive order and letting that try to stand on its own, good luck with that.
Yeah. And again, it's less offensive if it's an order that you like, if it's something that you want done right now. Where it becomes a problem is, you know, right now the shoe is on the right foot. You know, eventually that shoe is going to be on the left foot. And as bad as things were last time around with the last administration for people on the right, imagine how they'll be if the next guy is further to the left than the last guy. And imagine the precedent that he's going to be able to take. And he's going to be able to say, the precedent was set by President Trump. I'm doing the same thing he did. I'm just doing a different thing. Right. You know, he hated widgets and I hate Tamafluchis, and I'm going to go after the Tamafluchis. And we're all going, hey, keep your paws off my Tamafluchi. It doesn't end well when we start to see an erosion of the power of 1/3 of our governmental system.
We should have talked about the Mohammed, I don't know his name, Colombia. He just finished grad school, but he's been supporting the Palestinian cause and basically yelling fire on the campus of Columbia and radicalizing a lot of folks. And I don't see, this is where I'm going with both of these cases. You're a non-U.S. citizen on our country. Anytime we want to send your ass packing, we should have the ability, we being the elected officials and the DOJ, have the ability, or the State Department, whomever has purview on that, kick your ass out of here. I'll take that green card now. Thank you. Goodbye.
Mhm.
You warrant your welcome. Yeah, but my First Amendment rights. You're a non-U.S. citizen. Am I missing something here? What do you think?
And that's the way it is in just about every other country in the world, right? Go to Malaysia and start drawing cartoons about Muhammad and watch what happens.
Yeah,
you're not going to be there very long, or you'll be in prison.
Well, Charlie Hebdo showed. I mean, you could draw pictures of Muhammad and
get shot up
in Paris and still,
right.
Have jihadists
come my point is,
kill you.
Other countries don't put up with that.
Hell no.
And we don't. Other countries aren't going to, give you your inalienable rights just because you're set foot on their country. Other countries don't put up with you showing up with a visa and then overstaying the visa. Mm-hmm. We do. And, part of the problem is we have a very vigorous legal profession with, people that are intelligent and very driven. And they honestly feel like they are doing God's work. And they're doing good, and they are out there helping the downtrodden. And so a guy like him that should be thrown out of the country as a threat is going to have some very, very competent legal minds flocking to his door for a variety of reasons to support him. And they're going to fight the fight. Now, maybe they eventually lose, but just like we're seeing with the president, you throw it into court and, hey, maybe you win, maybe you don't, but you get your day in court. You get to fight it out. You get to fight it out in the media. You're going to get all kinds of assets are going to come flocking to you. Our friend Andrew Bronco will tell you all the time, you get into court on a charge, you can't predict how it's going to end.
No,
you just can't. And that's what these guys are doing. He's making a big deal. And look, had he not been running his suck, had he not been getting in trouble, we would never have heard of the guy, right? Mm-hmm. Well, look what he's done to his profile now. Now, even if he gets thrown out of the country, he's going to be, he's going to have a followership when he gets to whatever country he lands in. They're going to talk about how mistreated he was by the U.S. And then the next administration that's on the left is going to say, you know what, we'll welcome him back. We would like to have him back. He was mistreated by that rotten orange man. Let's get him back over here and let him have his freedom of speech.
What do you think the UK would do to me if I was in London saying, let's get these rape gangs deported? I'd be on
if you were saying
flight out of that place.
I'm not being a UK citizen. I'm always hesitant to comment on their laws, but the way they've been administering them lately, if you're just the wrong skin tone, sir. Mm-hmm. You go over there and speak ill of the right skin tone, you're going to jail. I mean, they're not just telling you knock it off. They're not just giving you a fine. They're actually coming down and hooking you up and booking you. Mm-hmm. So I just don't see that as a sustainable way of maintaining your society.
Where, here or there?
There. And
I don't see it here either, because in this case, they allowed lawyered up members of Tren de Aragua, Venezuelan street gangs that have committed all kinds of atrocities, to go before this judge and get this stay to stop our president and just stop the wheels of justice in its tracks. You can't have a society like that. I mean, when you have lower court justices stopping our elected officials from doing what the electorate has clearly demanded. Am I missing something here?
No, but that's our system, right?
Yeah.
And look, if you want to have a conversation about how our judicial system has gotten a little bit more overpowered of recent, that the Supreme Court is overpowered, I'm your guy. I'll have that conversation with you. Mm-hmm. But again, I come back to, why are we seeing an increase in power resident in the 12 members of the Supreme Court and the one person at the top of the executive branch? Because the 435 people over on Capitol Hill aren't doing their job.
Well, and that's what Dr. Gordon Bodson says. Doesn't he have a majority in both houses of Congress? Why are they not doing their jobs? Your guess is as good as mine, Dr. Bodson.
Hey, last week, my wife came home and said, I think we're getting shut down.
Really?
I think we're going to get shut down again. And it was because Congress couldn't get their act together. And then, of course, at the last possible second, they did, but only because the minority party said, okay, we're not going to fight this.
All right.
Had they decided to fight it, we would have gotten shut down again.
Don Bothwell says the last time Congress passed an all-in-one budget bill instead of piecemeal continuing resolution was 1996.
There we go. 30 years.
That's insanity, man.
That is. Because, again, that's your one job, Bob.
I know.
Pass a budget.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do. And they don't. I don't even know, does the president even bother to submit a budget every year? Because those things are huge. It's a lot of work.
I can't imagine. Why? When you can, It's been generations since we had one.
I have no idea.
This is a new one, Dr. Fuller, and it just came out a few hours ago. Are you familiar with this? What
No,
Trump
I haven't seen
has
this one.
said about pardons? You're going to love this one. And again, I only have one more slide after this. We'll keep it short and sweet. According to this tweet, he tweeted it and put it on Truth Social first. The pardons that Sleepy Joe Biden gave to the unselect committee of political thugs and many others are hereby declared void, vacant, and of no further force or effect because of the fact that they were done by auto pen. In other words, Joe Biden did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by Biden. He knew nothing about them, and the people that did may have committed a crime. Wow.
Well, that's going to court.
Yeah.
That's going right to court. I honestly don't know. This is new territory because I don't think, Will Parker's got a good point there about no pay for Congress until a balanced budget is passed.
I love that.
Of course, who passes that law? Congress. Is Congress going to pass that law?
Nope.
I don't know what the legality is if one precedent, if the president has the power to undo pardons. I just don't know. And I think that's going to be a Supreme Court issue.
Yeah. But it also calls into account what should and should not be auto pen. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I tell you, as a staff officer, and I know that you probably had by dur authority at somewhere in your government career, whether as an Army officer or in the Bureau, you know, the colonels that I worked for were very reticent to give by dur authority. And then when you got the letter saying, "Oh, you could sign these things for me," it was very specific, the scope.
Yeah, but I mean,
God help you if you signed outside that scope, you know.
Right. And how many times were you told in the military, sign with blue ink?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because they didn't want photocopies.
Right.
Right. Because it's too easy to forge and screw around with photocopies. So you had to sign everything in original signature. Had to have an original signature. That seems like a reasonable requirement to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think I'm hearing rumblings this morning, and I don't want to go on record with this, Dr. Fuller, but that the documents that were used to justify the pardons were all shredded and destroyed. So it's like, well, how do we know that he saw these? We know they were auto pen. I mean, that's how we can take them all and compare them. They're definitely auto pen signatures, but everything that justified the pardons or clemencies have been completely scrubbed.
Wow. Well, that of course is an indicator of guilt. And I'm surprised that would be legal. I would think that you would have to maintain those records.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to happen here is the courts are going to get involved and make some very specific demands on this sort of thing. And of course, you know, somebody who's making auto pens is right now figuring out an AI program to make sure that there are slight variations in every signature done by the auto pen going forward, so you don't have this happen. But I just look, if you're signing a normal amount of pardons over the course of your presidency, you know, 200, 300, Obama's 400, you don't need an auto pen.
Right.
It's a lot of signatures, but it's not 4,000. It's not, you know, what was it, 2,500 or whatever it was in the last few hours of. I mean, there's no way to do that other than auto pen.
Right.
So, you know, and I've seen signature stamps used before, but not on something like a presidential pardon. I mean, that now it may very well be legal. I don't know. But it certainly doesn't pass the smell test, because then what ends up happening? You end up with a guy who clearly appears to be in the latter stages of dementia. Sure. Signing thousands of pardons. And the question can rightly and should rightly be asked, did he know what he was signing? I mean, we have a court, or we have a prosecutor saying that we're not going to prosecute this guy because he's not mentally competent to stand trial. Mm-hmm. But he's still mentally competent to be the president of the United States. That doesn't pass the logic smell test to me.
Well, and I've talked about this before. Governor Ray Blanton here in Tennessee back in the 70s, you know, he went to the FBI came in and arrested him while he thought he was still the governor. In reality, they had swore in the new incoming governor a couple of days ahead of time. And then the FBI came into his office and put him in handcuffs because he was, you know, pardons for cash or pardon to play. You know, what are we going to do? And So yes, this system has to be closely scrutinized, or else there's a lot of room for malfeasance. So to say that it's just an auto pen and some staffers can do whatever the hell they want, unacceptable.
Right.
Now, where can this go, Dr. Fuller? You think he will have Pam Bondi and Cash go in and start doing criminal investigations in these and just throw the pardon away, and we'll see how it all plays out in the court later?
I think so. I mean, why else would you void these out? A thumb in Joe Biden's eye, I guess. But Biden's mental capacity is so far gone at this point. I doubt he knows or cares.
No.
So is it a thumb in his legacy? Certainly. But the obvious answer is they're going after these people. And I think they're going after some of the high profile people first. But my question then would become, when there are thousands of people that are pardoned, and arguably the president didn't pardon them or didn't knowingly pardon them, then somebody else in the staff did. Who?
Right.
I want to know who and why. Because to me, that smells like there's an awful lot of opportunity for cash to change hands. There's an awful lot of opportunity here for people to, commit fraud and malfeasance and sell pardons to, hey, look, we're doing 3,900 other pardons. Let me just put Uncle Bob in there too, so he can get his guns back. So I think that, if you're going to go down this road, then you're going to open up an awful lot of investigative pathways. And boy, I sure do hope you have an investigative agency that's capable of conducting these kind of investigations, and you haven't fired everybody. That's going to be tricky. If you parse down all your investigative agencies and then unleash the hounds on 4,000 pardons, that's going to be manpower intensive.
Yeah. I want to go back to something we mentioned a moment ago. My brother Jeff says the precedent may have been set when we were allowing terrorists and Gitmo the right to trial. I absolutely agree with him. I think that was a dangerous precedent to allow these Gitmo detainees to lawyer up. It made zero sense to me then, and it makes even less sense to me now because of the fear of the precedent that it sets. And I've already said what should have happened as we started rounding these folks up. There should have been a military tribunal, and they were hung, and that was that. And you keep maybe a few back in reserve just in case you need prisoner swap somewhere down the road. But all the big boys, it's a wrap, brother, and we'll toss your ass to the sharks there and Gitmo Bay.
Yeah, it's I talk about that and my kind of stance on that in my award-winning book, Empathy for the Devil.
Yes.
And we've talked about it on the show as well. I've never understood the logic behind creating a new classification of prisoner by coming up with the enemy combatant. Look, a strict reading of the Geneva Convention would have shown you these are non-uniformed combatants. They are not representing any major national belligerent or minor national belligerent. They are, arguably some could be Taliban and therefore representative of the Afghan government, the recognized Afghan government at the time. Okay, but they were non-uniformed. And all the Al-Qaeda guys, non-uniformed. And the Geneva Convention is very clear what you do with those people. You put them up against the wall and you shoot them.
Right.
And our delicate sensibilities these days won't allow us to just grab these guys and shoot them. But I'll tell you what, how many POW camps were they keeping? There weren't a whole lot of our guys that were surviving the arrest process, the prisoner process. They were getting decapitated on the battlefield. So I don't feel a lot of sympathy for them. And I'm the first to admit I'm a little bit close to this issue. All right. So take that for what it's worth. Having actually been in combat with these guys and traded shots with them, my opinion may be slanted.
And don't you talk? I don't know if this is in your book or something you mentioned on the show. I think it's in your book. You interrogated a youngster and he was released, and you ran into him again in Afghanistan. Got back to it again, right?
Yep, that was
recidivism rates of those people were pretty high,
right up there. Yeah. And why? If he just hurts one more American, why? Look, you want to get in a uniform of the Russian government and fight a war against the United States, and we catch you, then you should be treated as a prisoner of war. You want to do what they were doing, the way they were doing it, and conduct yourself the way they were conducting themselves. I mean, my God, the war started when they killed over 3,000 American civilians.
Right.
I just have zero sympathy for you. And then we catch you on the battlefield shooting at us again. Well, guess what, buddy? Bad idea. We'll just take you out, have, like you said, have a military tribunal and you're done. You never leave the country. The key guys that we want to interrogate, we hang on to them for a while. But eventually,
Bye, Felicia.
yeah. I mean, look, we gave the Nazis at Nuremberg trials.
Mm-hmm.
We gave them representation. We gave them actual trials. And in some of their cases, it was such an overwhelming amount of evidence, it was a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But we gave them trials. They were in uniform.
Yes.
You know what we did with German spies when we caught them? We shot them. It's that simple.
Am I missing something?
Yeah. So I guess we're kind of
what's funny is in that case, I'm like, okay, well, maybe they'll learn from the precedents of World War II. And when they created new precedents, they went stupid. Whether it was the Coalition Provisional Authority, Memo 1, all the stupid things Paul Bremer did, setting a new precedent, or the case where they should have followed military tribunal precedent and didn't. I mean, it was just the whole GWAT. I mean, I tell you what, case study for hubris, mismanagement, you name it, right?
Yeah, and while I say this, also don't misunderstand me that I'm an advocate for waterboarding and torturing. I'm not. I'm just not. We're better than that.
Yeah.
But the laws, and this is not just a U.S. law. This is not something coming out of Texas, right? Where we just we shoot them. No, this is Geneva Convention, 100 years of settled legal authority. I mean, this is the way things are done. And if you don't want to do them the way things are done, well, then the rest of us are going to.
Yeah, I got no problem with it. And again, you're not some shrieking violet here. I don't think you would have a problem with it, but it's just it's I don't know. I don't know. Anyway,
it is very frustrating.
Yeah, I want to kind of close on this because I think this is where you and I will somewhat differ. I'm just as one American voice, I'm disappointed thus far for the different reasons that perhaps you are disappointed so far with the Department of Justice and the FBI as far as, and I mean the Twitter, when Cash makes his very rare tweet, oh, we're going after this organized crime here in America, this and that, and everybody's like, what the hell are you talking about? Your book and every podcast you were on leading up to this led us to believe you're going to go in one direction, and now you're completely 180 out. And the Twitter comments are great. I mean, they're just like, what are you talking about? The FBI is going to do this regardless. What you said you were going to do is X, and you have done zero of that. What do you think?
And look, I'm not one to say I told you so, but I will say as predicted. All right. Mm-hmm. He's young, he's inexperienced, he's untrained. Don't be surprised. Mm-hmm. Right? Just don't be surprised that some of these glass balls are going to hit the floor. I was kind of hoping that Pam Bondi would be a leavening factor in the administration. I haven't seen that. What I've seen of Mr. Patel thus far is less than inspiring. His pictures of him, he didn't announce that he visited HRT in his camouflage uniform the other day when I sent you those pictures. But those of us that have hung around HRT, that have been out to the facilities and whatnot, you recognize the terrain, you know what he's doing, you know where he is. So he shows up at HRT in a gray and black camouflage ensemble, while at the same time releasing what documents about Epstein? And look, we've talked about the difficulties in releasing the investigative documentation around Epstein. I've had that conversation on the show. But all he did was say, I'm going to release him, going to release him, going to release him. And Bondi said the same thing. I'm going to release him, I'm going to release him, I'm going to release him. And then what do they do? And then Bondi says, well, the FBI is holding out on me. They're not giving me the documentation. I'm like, well, hold on, sister. That may sound good to the electorate, to the folks out in the street. But the truth of the matter is, you're the Attorney General. Okay? You say it happens. The FBI is not holding out any documents. Matter of fact, all the documents the FBI have are already in possession of the prosecutors in New York City. So there's an even shorter chain of command, shorter chain of custody between them and her. So the idea that the FBI is holding documents away from the Attorney General is ludicrous. It simply doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, it was in the possession of DOJ before she took office. So when I hear her say, well, the FBI is holding that out, I'm like, no, then why aren't you firing people? Why aren't you dragging Kash Patel in front of your office and beating him, with a bag of hammers? Because that's not true. That's why you're delaying, you're dodging, you're ducking, you're weaving. And look, we all assume there are documents in that file, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a logical assumption based on what we know. Mm-hmm. What they released the other day amounted to nothing. I mean, mm-hmm. It really did. Was nothing new, which tells us something, right? It tells us either A, there actually is nothing in that file, which is concerning, or B, there is, and they're holding it back. Now, they could be holding it back for prosecutive reasons, right? They don't want to ruin the cases. These cases are years old now. So right. We're well past the point where people should be charged. Well past the point, unless there's something that I just don't see, which is certainly possible. I'm not the case agent. I don't know. Maybe there's leverage and you're leveraging people. I mean, we know at least one customer was a member of the royal family. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's people who are in sensitive.
And has not been held accountable, by the way, by anybody.
He got cast out. I mean, his mother was very disappointed in him. He's going to have to live on just the hundreds of millions of dollars he has instead of the billions that the family has. That suffering is real, Rich. So maybe there's leverage that is being used in there. I just don't know. But to your point, it's a bad look, right? You swore up and down this is what you were going to do. You didn't do it. And Patel is starting to stack those things up, right? I mean, my first day, I'm going to close down FBI headquarters and open it the next day as a museum to the deep state. It's a direct quote from him off of mm-hmm. at least one podcast that I've seen. Mm-hmm. Didn't happen.
No.
Okay. He's getting in there now. He's gotten the briefings, right? He's the director of the FBI. So he's now been shown the keys to the kingdom. He will tell you that, I saw it all before I got in here. No, you didn't.
No, you did not.
You did not. You just simply didn't. You weren't in a position that you would be allowed access. I mean, I've watched people from the FBI tell members of Congress and senators, no, we're not going to show you that information. Mm-hmm. I've been present for conversations where only 2 members of Congress were allowed into the skiff to be briefed on incredibly sensitive information that even, and I've talked about on the show before. I'm like, whoa, that's cool. We did that. That's really awesome. He's getting those briefings now. And oh, by the way, today is Bongino's first day as the deputy.
Happy St. Patty's Day as well, Dr. Fuller.
And to you, sir. Yeah, so he's going to get the full briefings. And so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say after years of saying the FBI should be closed down. It's a non-functioning organization. It's outlived its usefulness. We got to shut it down. They're both being shown now the deeply secretive investigative steps that are being conducted both for counterintelligence and counter-criminal investigations. And I think it'll be much more difficult for them both to say, yeah, we need to shut this place down.
I mean, I love the FBI. I certainly don't want to, let me be clear, when my son was in college, I was definitely saying, hey, we be willing to talk to Grant because I think a career in the Bureau would be a great thing. I'm a huge supporter of the Bureau and its mission. What I'm not a supporter of is when they go off reservation. And right. I mean, they not necessarily every brick and mortar agent are not doing that, but it's I think the top, whether it's the Comeys of the world or whomever that are stepping outside their, judicial lanes is a freaking problem. And I think
you and I are 100% together on that.
Yes, sir.
But how to solve it, I think, is where we kind of diverge. Because to me, you can axe the people that need to be axed. You can get in there and you can swing that hammer and clear the decks. And they already have done a pretty good job decapitating the organization. But I keep telling this, and I keep telling it to anybody that will listen to me, you've got to make systemic changes. You've got to change the actual structure of how people become managers in the FBI.
Yes.
And nobody's doing that. And it needs to be done. And it needs to be done, I think, by a change agent like Patel and President Trump and Pam Bondi. I think they could get that done. They could force the issue. But they don't seem to want to do that, because that's difficult. That's building things. It's much easier to tear things down than it is to build.
Yeah.
And they need to build things if they want the organization to be the storied organization 100 years from now.
For those that are kind of just joining us late in the game here, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that you were talking about a fiction that you are probably writing, and it kind of deals with a similar set of snipers. And I think going back to the DC sniper case, and I know they're not snipers, that's what it's called. If you want to Google it later, back in 2002, that's a great case in point for the FBI because they were hopping in that little corridor around, Virginia to Maryland and this county to that county. That's a great case in point for bringing the power of the Bureau in because these little counties get overwhelmed. I mean, not that Montgomery County is a little county, but you see what I'm saying, right?
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Even in a place like Montgomery County, you get a case like that, it's an all hands on deck event.
Mm-hmm.
But there are still people running red lights. There are still people mugging people. There are people committing robberies, burglaries, domestics, all of those normal functions that the PD conducts on the daily are still there. But now all of a sudden, they're 10, 15, 25% of their manpower is dedicated to this case. And that's an unreasonable drain. It's one that maybe Montgomery County can afford for a short time, right? Mm-hmm. They can start bringing people in off of leave, pull people back from schools, whatever, classes that they're taking. But in the long term, you can't sustain it. Mm-hmm. So that's the two things that the FBI can always bring to bear is a lot of bodies and a lot of money.
Well, there's no reason in the world why the FBI should have had to come into Atlanta and solve the child murder case in Atlanta.
Oh God, that's going back a minute, isn't it?
Right, but I mean, I remember it being huge back in my childhood because it was all centered in Atlanta proper. However, if they want to bring the power of that in there in those kind of cases, I think the FBI has always been happy to get it. I don't want to make this being just a cheerleading session for the FBI. I just want to be clear that they do amazing things day in and day out with very little, of it being ever seen by the American public. What I do want to be clear about is the things with the Epstein list. And my brother even says they redacted things that were previously released, which is insane. And by the way, okay, well, we're working on the full Monty of the Epstein files. However, it's going to have to be redacted for national security reasons. I'm like, time out. What does national security have to do with a child pedophile ring? Well, be careful about how you answer that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I can give you a off the top of my head, I would say that somebody that's involved in this is either cooperating with the U.S. or is providing information to the U.S. on that topic, or they've got him dead to rights, and they're saying, look, if you don't start working for us and work this off, we're going to give you up, or you're going to get prosecuted. So I can see that in the short term. But the problem is both Mr. Patel and Ms. Bondi have said, we're going to release it. They've written that check with their mouths that their ass can't cash. Because now that it's easy when you're on the outside looking in going, we're going to there's no reason to have this. You got to let the American people want to know. And then you get in there and you're like, oh crap. Yeah, we can't let this out.
Our fingerprints are all over this thing, along with these other foreign countries as we were establishing these honeypots on St. Jeffrey Island.
Yeah. Or President Trump talked about releasing the Kennedy assassination information his first time around. And then he read the documents and came out and said, yeah, the country's not ready to see this. So you get that information and it flies in the face of the promises you made, and it makes you look bad.
I don't get that. And I'm not being naive. I mean, let's say Johnson had an involvement in it. I mean, I'm just making something up here based on some of the conspiracies that are out there. Okay, great. Does that mean we're going to shutter the Johnson Presidential Library? Maybe. I mean, how bad is it going to be? Look, well, these CIA agents in concert with these other blah, blah, blah did this. I mean, if you listen to Rob Reiner and Soledad Sola-Bryan's amazing podcast, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, I highly recommend it. I think it's 10 episodes. But they name some former Army colonel who was in charge of operational planning. They met in these hotel rooms. They had this number of shooters. Here's who they were, and here's how they were recruited. This is what they were paid. I mean, so I don't understand at this point. I think just like the UAP issue, I think you're now are there going to be some people jump off of buildings? Probably, maybe. I don't know. People that weep in the streets, maybe. But I think the rest of us like, yeah, no shit. What do you think the American government's running around a bunch of Boy Scouts? No, of course they're doing nefarious crap in your
Yeah.
behalf.
And maybe the concern is in light of today's public opinion being so low, the American government, you throw that on there, you're throwing gas on a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Good point.
So, yeah, Will Parker makes an interesting point that the American people expect and demand that they're going to honor their word, and yet they're politicians. At the end of the day, they're politicians, and I've said it before. Mr. Patel's chief qualification for the position of director of the FBI and director of ATF is loyalty to President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
He has some passing experience elsewhere, but that isn't enough to justify his being in charge of these two colossal law enforcement organizations. So
well, you could make you could make the same thing for almost anybody. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, she's an Army National Guard, Hawaii National Guard lieutenant colonel, and now she's in director of national intelligence apparatus.
I'm getting old because when I was up on the hill, she was like a captain.
Yeah.
Jeez, maybe a lieutenant. Holy mackerel.
Ugh, Mark Hamilton says professional criminals. Ouch.
Yeah, but
that one before we go there, Dr. Fuller, my brother says, fingers crossed we are less than 3 months in. Hopefully we will not be having the same conversation in 2026. I mean, if they do, then the midterms are going to be a bloodbath. If they don't honor everything that they ran on, brother, good luck. You're going to lose my vote. This very clear what they said they wanted. Very clear what we said. Yeah, we gave them the mandate to do it, and now it's time to put up or shut up.
Yeah, and what'll end up happening is I don't foresee folks like yourself going out and voting for the other side.
No, I just won't show up.
People just won't show up, and our elections are so paper thin now. That will definitely throw a monkey wrench into the works. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't have run your mouth the way you did before you got in office. And then you shouldn't have been having done so, you shouldn't have been put in those offices. I mean, Bongino's going to get eaten alive.
Oh my God.
With all the stuff that he said, both he and Patel, they're the two guys in charge. Again, they're just going to have a very difficult time making substantive improvements in the organization. And I've said this before on a couple of shows, they're the right guys if you want to tear the place apart. They're not the right guys if you want to improve the place and make it better at what it does and focus in on core missions and parse it down in an intelligent fashion and establish structures within the organization that promote the right people, that get the right people in charge so that the organization does stay politically neutral and doesn't involve itself in politics in a way that should terrify all of us. Mm-hmm. These are not the right guys, at least from what I've seen thus far.
Well, and this is another thing that I heard this soundbite over the weekend, and I haven't heard it since. As I was driving back and forth to the hospital over the weekend with my daughter giving birth, I heard Trump say that Cash is moving the FBI to be close to the Department of Justice. It's going to be like 45 minutes away from Washington. And Trump is like, I told Cash, I'll build you the most beautiful building that's ever been built. Nobody will have ever seen the new FBI building like it's going to be. And I guess Cash was like, Mr. President, I don't need that. There's an unused commerce building. It's got room for like 1,000 people. That's all I need. Everybody else can go. So I'm like, okay, well, there you're saying what you've been saying. He's like, why do we have him in Washington, D.C. where they're 45 minutes away or whatever distance from the actual Department of Justice? He said they need to be close to Pam and the rest of them can get out. So I'm like, okay, well, why is the media not running with this? Did you hear that over the weekend?
I hadn't, but it goes back far enough. I mean, Comey was trying to get Bureau headquarters moved because the building's falling apart. It's too small, whatever. There was a big political fight over move it to Maryland versus move it to Virginia because there's a lot of money involved in that. The agent population wanted it moved to Virginia because it's easier to live in Virginia. Nobody wanted to live in Maryland because of a whole raft of reasons, taxes being chief amongst them. Right now, FBI headquarters is literally a 1-minute walk to DOJ. Mm-hmm. It's right across the street. The two buildings are right across the street from one another. I personally would love to see FBI headquarters move to, Nebraska, put it out in, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, or some crazy place out there where you've got a lot of land, you can get good quality people for the price you're paying, and then leave a small, congressional liaison and DOJ liaison, maybe even the director of the FBI, all stay in DC in a much smaller footprint, and get everybody else, all the functions of the FBI, out of that area. They've moved a big chunk of the FBI out of Quantico and put them down at Huntsville, Alabama. So things can be done at distance. This isn't 1920. This is 1925. This is 2025. So communications are easier. Travel is easier. You can move these things into areas that are more conducive to the job and not lose any functionality. They could literally put additional bodies into Washington Field Office, for example, which is 3 blocks from FBI headquarters. I mean, I used to walk over there when my wife worked there and I worked at headquarters. We would meet in the middle for lunch. She'd walk and I'd walk. So it's walking distance. You can move a big chunk of the FBI. I mean, 10% of the FBI is at FBI headquarters. 10%. Get them out of there. I'm not saying you don't necessarily need all the functionality. I'm sure you could parse it down a bit, but they don't need to be in DC. They did 100 years ago. They don't now.
Right.
So, spend a little money, build a building out on one of the old military installations out in the Midwest. You got an airfield right there. You can move all the FBI's air assets onto the same place. You already own the land. It's
even if they just moved them to Quantico.
Footprint, you start to run out of room. Because Quantico is a big base for the Marines, but the part that they've carved out for, and I'm sure you've seen FBI.
Oh yeah, I've been there many times.
There's just not a lot of land to build on over there. DEA has taken a big chunk for their academy and their academy building. The ranges and the range fans behind the ranges take up a lot of space, right? Because you can't build a range fan behind the ranges unless you want 308 rounds passing through your windows every now and again.
I don't.
So you run out of space. Plus, the Marines have kind of, there are agreements that you'd have to enter into the Marines. And there's money that changes hands, and so you have to restructure all of that. But it could be done. But the problem is you're still in the DC area, and having worked on Quantico for 5 years, I'm here to tell you, the time it took me to get to work at the beginning of that 5 years versus the time it took me to get to work at the end of that 5 years was night and day. I mean, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So just get it completely. Just get.
Plus, something, the center of America, man. Well, Dr. Fuller, I kept you on here over an hour. Thank you so much for being on today. Quick show, down and dirty, just a few things that kind of hit the news this weekend. Any closing thoughts, sir?
It's an interesting set of times to live in, folks. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen and when it's going to happen because things are in flux. But the one thing we can be certain of is that fight is coming. Be ready.